Hello, my group literature review is about inactive perception, and the main topic is leverage action in perception and perception in action. And here we go. As for the problem description, from the word meaning we know that inactive perception uh, means that the robot has to censor the environment to get the feedback, and in the meanwhile he has to perform some uh, reaction to the environment to change its state, and it is certainly one of the most important parts of HRI, and thereby it comes out to question that in which area, under which circumstance, and how we provide the reaction can leverage the IP to the fullest. And as for the motivation, I have just come up with 3 points about it. The first one is that we can collect a lot of abundant and rich sensory signal from the environment by using different kinds of sensors. And the second is that we could predict the change of the environment state by analyzing the sensory signals we have collected before. And the third part is that we could thereby think how we could generate the reactions to the environment in a more regular way. And actually, there are some overalls in active perception. The RQs I have just think about 4 points. The first is that imagine imagine that doing the people in action with their environment, he will have no sense what his brain has processed during the whole procedure, which means that he took his reaction to the environment based on his prior knowledge. However, for robots, it is very difficult to generate such a kind of reaction to the environment because he has no idea what prior knowledge of that object is in the environment. And actually, there are very large of components during the process of inactive perception, like we have to deal with the visual feedback, acoustic feedback, haptic feedback, and try to change the environment in manipulation or navigation way, and something like that. And the key point is that how we balance each component in the IP so that we could have a high efficient inactive in action with the environment. And that is the first point. The second point is that we all know that inactive perception is widely used in many research, and if there is any common framework for the research to take on so that it could address all the challenges by developing adequate subcomponents, that is another important questions for us to think about. And we all know that inactive perception has a widely used in different areas, especially in HRI, and mostly it is for its inaction form is about manipulating and grasping objects. And so we are asking what are the new potential applications areas of inactive and perception except for manipulating and grasping objects. And the last one is that we could get the feedback in a different way, which means that we could get the feedback of haptic feedback, acoustic feedback, visual feedback, and how how and what is the feature of all these feedback serve during the whole process? That is the questions we have to figure out if we want to get a high efficient doing the interaction with the environment. And the benefits is somehow the same as the motivation I mentioned before. It includes the generation of novel signals and how we could deal with the action perception regularity. We could either use the regularity or learn the regularity for us to generate more efficient interaction with the environment. And there are quite a few application fields as for the inactive perception. Here are the four sub areas I like most. So I will illustrate each of them for the following slides. Yeah, that comes about application areas of IP. Okay, the first is the object segmentation. Just imagine that you have two Lego blocks which is stacking on another, and if you're a robot, you have no idea what the Lego blocks is and how they are stacking up one on each other, one on another. So it would be very hard for the robot to identify them and thereby separate each apart by just statically looking at the combination of the two objects, because he doesn't have a prior knowledge of what it is in his point of view. So we have just to think about the ways for the robot to identify and segment the two blocks apart. It includes move one block up and down and detach one block and move it omnidirectionally. And there exists some forceful hints to indicate boundary of the objects, which could also help robots to decide whether or not it is an integrated one or just the two separate things. And all these methods are from inactive perception, and this is very useful area of inactive perception. And here I just want to talk about object segmentation in a more detailed way with the thesis I have read and took notes on. And here are some of the theses about object segmentation. For the first is that in this thesis, the author has just came out the problem that how could the robot identify and sort the target object from a pile of cluster in an efficient way. And as you can see in the picture, there are many blocks which have been piled in a cluster, and for the robot to identify each of them and put it accordingly to the bins on the side. And they have just proposed a method that we could increase the accuracy of the robot grasping manipulation to these small size and color objects with motion primitive perception. And for the details, they have just conducted an experiment to identify the objects and pick up and sort them out for each item. And in the whole procedure, they have just designed an algorithm that the robot could spread them for several times to make it scatter and not like look like integrated ones, so that they could separate from each other with more space, and thereby it could help the robot to identify each of them, because there are actually space around each block, and in this way it would be easier for the robot to identify the objects, and thereby it realize the object segmentation. And there are quite pros and cons for this experiment. The pros is that it is applicable for small and even a little bit larger colored objects, and the devices is very cheap because it only needs to connect to sensor the visual data from the environment, and it actually provides us a very good framework for manipulation aid perception interface, and we could design somehow interface corresponding interfaces according to this experiment. But there are actually some cons for it. It is that it is uncertain the spread times for different levels of clutter, because the clutter is a very subjective term for us to identify the objects, the level of the mass. So it is not that stable for the robot to make the object segmentation during our experiment, because it actually lies on the shapes and the size of the object, and how mass the group of the objects is. That is an important factors that could influence how the robot behave during this experiment. And here's another example of object segmentation. In this thesis, the author has the problem that robot can act autonomously in dynamic environment where self-learned action it needs to perform, as a result of which there should be an efficient way for it to sense the information from the environment, which means that it is necessary for the robot to generate some self-learned algorithm to help it identify and make the object segmentation in a more accurate way. And the proposed method is that the author has generated the method by using the combination of probabilistic model and inactive perception, in which way robot can learn how to segment items heuristically. Means that the robot can learn how to segment the object by from times of trial, and it has nothing to do with the human invention, and that is the level of their autonomy. And as for the experiment, the robot arm will first observe the cluttered objects in 3 different viewpoints, which are from the upper, and from the left side, and from the right side, and thereby, after generating the visual feedback, the robot arm will readjust the way to segment the items apart after each trial. For example, the robot will first look at the objects, and then it will try to segment the objects using the sticks, which is held in its hand, and he will move the sticks if to past the object, and after one trial he will analyze the segmentation efficient of the object, and then he will decide to generate the next trial with the same method, with the same way he has did during the past time, and he will just perform the same actions from time to time until it thinks that all the objects have been segmented successfully, and he will just stop its work. And in this way, there are quite some pros and cons also for the contributions and limitations. The pros is that the robot, as what I have said before, the robot can learn from action without human intervention, and the robust in the presence of noise and uncertainty in real-world experiments is quite sure for the robot arm to perform the task. And what's more, it allows for straightforward integration of multiple modalities, and all these could help it to be a very excellent project in the area of object segmentation. And but there is another insufficient part, which is that it will take longer than expected for some simple object segmentation. For example, if you're just four simple objects, it will also took some time to separate all the things apart, even if what you need is just some basic actions to separate them apart, and that would be lot less efficient for the robot to generate the performance and action. And this part is about multimodal object model learning, which is another use of inactive perception. And as you can see that as the subfields for computer vision, machine learning, and deep learning are widely used in object recognition, but there is still many disadvantages that the learning process has faced, which includes the feature extraction, the model overfitting, and the low accuracy. And some of this is due to the lack of the data. And however, IP inactive perception has provided a very efficient way for the machine to generate more data to train the model, and which helps make it not overfitting and raise the accuracy somehow. And this is an example in the thesis I have just read. And in the thesis, the problem has came out problem that how to build up the shape of 3D space model for an object in a dynamically changing environment with more accuracy. Which means that for a robot, I need the model in a 3D space. So if I want such a kind of model, I have to first identify the shape of the model, a shape of the object to generate the model, right? So they have just proposed a method for it to generate the model. Their methods includes first using only features to form an initial hypothesis about object shape, which means that they have to generate the outline of the model with the first glance of their Kinect camera. And for the second, that they'll add tactile measurement to refine the model, which means that there is another robot arm. They will use the robot arm to sense the shape of their object from time to time, and once and the algorithm is that once they think that the model is complete, they will just stop the action and upload the final model it has generated. And all these are through the Gaussian process regression model. This is a mathematical way. And as for the experiment evaluation, the model is initialized with static visual feedback, and grasping action is predefined for sensing the surface of each object. Because you have to know that different objects has different shapes on its surface. So the problem is that how we just censor the surface of the different objects with different kinds of actions. In this thesis, the author has told us that it has some predefined actions for the objects already known to generate actions according to the already known objects. So both the model and the actions get refined during the process until a good model is obtained. It is somehow like a recursive way, or like a circle way for the robot to do the same thing from time to time, and each time it will count the accuracy of the model until the accuracy is up to the threshold it has defined, so that it can so that our successful model has been generated in such a kind of way. And as for the contributions and limitations, the pros is that the model build-up process is entirely automatic without any human intervention. It is automatic. In a great extent. But the cons is that the Gaussian process have a computational cost, which means that the generated model may not be that accurate because of the flow of the Gaussian process. It is the fatal of the mathematical model. So it's just the disadvantages of these methods. And the last I want to talk about is the manipulation skill learning. It is also another application error of their inactive perception, and we all know that for most of the cases, the inactive perception, the goal of the IP is to somehow accomplish a particular manipulation skill which combines some of the pre-specified tasks, and there are quite a few factors that influences the manipulations. And here I have just came up with the 3 points that we have to take care of in the manipulation skill learning, which includes obstacle avoidance, movement of the objects and the field of view, and the subtle motion perturbation to manipulator. And all these are the factors that could influence the quantity and effect of the manipulation skill. So So in the inactive perception, a proposed method has been introduced to keep the manipulation stability on the force exerted as a perturbation to the robot on, and these are what the thesis has introduced in the specific topic. And here comes the 3 open research questions. So what I want to know is what is the regularity for humans in active perception, because the human has to overcome the movement of the field of view and in the somehow motion sickness and something that may possibly happen in the inactive perception. And the second is that to what extent can reinforcement learning benefit the manipulation action in IP? We know that reinforcement learning is somehow like an efficient way for the robot to generate the necessary data to train the model with more accuracy. So it has a widely used in the area of IP. So what is the extent that it can be applied in the area of IP? And that is the specific question we have to think about. And the third is that does it make sense to tailor visual features and the corresponding tracking methods to the requirements of IP, which means that all the information, most of the information that we have gained from the environment is through visual feedback. And during the whole process, it includes many visual features and many corresponding tracking methods. So what if we have divided the visual data apart and to extract the features of the visual data, and how does it make sense to the inactive perception? That I think that is the specific questions we have to figure out if we want to put it into the area which needs more abundant visual feedback. And that is all about my group literature review, and thanks so much for your listening and attention.